The guy who's a veteran who's been at a lot of different schools and who played so well for the Blue Demons last season. He can give you that extra edge.
That was a nice move by Pipkins, taking it right to the rack himself. Wide open three, left wing, and it's good. Nylon, the dunk likes that, Matt.
A three from the right side, and it's good! The one, Pipkins, the man, yet again.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Flex of Providence Friars Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Howie, alongside
Matt St. Jean.
And today we will be continuing with our Big East preseason coaches rankings breakdown. Coming in at number 10 is the DePaul Blue Demons. Now, DePaul Blue Demons, they have been historically known for residing in the basement of the Big East. Their leader is Dave Leitao. He's in his second stint at DePaul. He has a career record of 207 and 227, an overall record at DePaul of 122 and 132, and a record in this time around at his second stint of 64 and 98. Last season, DePaul finished dead last in the Big East with a record of 3 and 15, while boasting a 16 and 16 overall record. Now, last season at DePaul, it was kind of a Jekyll and Hyde story where they had a powerful non-conference play, and the wheels fell off as soon as conference play began. So in non-conference, they beat Texas Tech in overtime in DePaul. They won at Iowa and won at Minnesota. And all three of those teams were top 30 KenPom teams. Then they started off conference play with 4 losses. They beat number 5 Butler and then went on to lose 8 in a row. Matt, what are your initial thoughts on this DePaul team coming into the 2020-2021 season?
Well, I mean, last season was disappointing, and you got to find a way to put it behind you. This is a team that has talent, had a very strong recruiting class 2 years ago, and you got to find a way to make it work. You got to forget about the way the Big East season ended, and you got to look at all the positives from that non-conference schedule and build on them. And you're not really going to have a non-conference this year. There's only going to be a couple games. So you got to very quickly figure out how are you going to beat Big East teams. That's been the hurdle for DePaul for a very long time. And last year there was that hope for it. Didn't get there. This is the time. You have talent. You got to figure out how you beat Big East teams.
Right, and while DePaul does have a slew of returning talent, they do lose Paul Reed, the 6'9" forward, who was their second leading scorer last season. And he was just a nightmare to guard. He was lanky. He was a positionless player. I mean, he could play the 3, the 4. If you wanted to go small, he could play the 5. He was a pain in the neck to guard. I mean, for any team in the Big East, a lanky scorer. I mean, you can't teach length. It's one of the most common sayings in basketball. But you lose Paul Reed. So, Matt, where do you fill that void that Paul Reed leaves in this DePaul offense that was hot and cold last season?
I mean, you got a guy who averaged over 15 points per game there and was a double-double machine. That's not small shoes to step into, but it always helps when you got a guy like Charlie Moore coming back. He's first team All Big East preseason, 15.5 points per game plus 6.1 assists per game last season. I mean, this is a kid who can do it all. He's just a really fun player to watch for DePaul. There's going to be a lot on his shoulders this year. But, I mean, as the leading point guard, he's got a chance to turn them into something special. And I think, all basketball fans know that if you have a point guard that really is special and can make things happen, that can mask a lot of deficiencies for your team. That can get you through games that you wouldn't otherwise win. So this is a DePaul team. You're gonna have a lot of tough games, and having a guy like Charlie Moore, the guy who's a veteran who's been at a lot of different schools and who played so well for the Blue Demons last season, he can give you that extra edge.
You know, Matt, I think you bring up some great points. Something about Charlie Moore. He is DePaul really is the only team in the Big East that returns their leading scorer, which is Charlie Moore. He's first team all preseason Big East, and yet DePaul is still ranked second to last. What do you take that?
I mean, I think that says a lot more about the coaching and the history at DePaul than anything else. I mean, this is a team. Dave Leitao has struggled as the head coach. He has a losing record. I don't believe they've ever made an NCAA tournament in either one of his times with the team, either one of his stints. And they just gave him a contract extension this last offseason. So, I mean, you're putting a lot on him, and quite frankly, he historically has not been able to get it done for them. However, they had the third best recruiting class in the Big East last season, according to 24/7 Sports. And that includes a guy like Romeo Weems. He's going into his sophomore year. He played very well for them, the 6'7" guy, averaged 8 points a game last year, and he was a 62nd overall recruit. So a guy like that developing, hitting that next stride, that's what can take your team and cause them to overperform expectations. You got a guy like Jalen Butts, forward, 6'9", is a veteran presence out there. He averaged double-digit points per game last year, and that's a guy, I mean, you want to fill the shoes of Paul Reed. He's a guy in that same frame, that same stature who can play down low, and he's not going to be as big of a threat. I mean, Paul Reed's going to the NBA. But Jalen Butts can compete. He's a good player. He's going to do well in the Big East. The problem comes once you get past those guys, it gets a little bit sketchier. There's talent. The question is, what happens with it? You got a guy like Marquise Jacobs, who's going to probably be your backup point guard this year. He's going to play a little bit. He was 159th overall recruit. Only played 21 games last year, had about 3 points per game in that time. You got a center, Nick Ungend, who's 6'11". He was outside the top 200, barely inside the top 300 as a recruit. But those are the kind of guys who you got to find a way to bring them into the picture. And then also you got a whole bunch of grad transfers coming into this team. The three, Paul Polycap, who one of the best names in the Big East right there, Polycap. Brian Patrick and Ray Salnavy, I believe is how you say that. These are three guys all coming from smaller schools, Manhattan, IPFW, and Monmouth, respectively. And as grad transfers, they give you that veteran experience. So if guys like Charlie Moore and Jalen Butts and Romeo Weems can step up and be high-level players, those guys can give you a high floor. They can give you depth off the bench, and they can limit the burden you're putting on some of those younger players to really fill out this team and let them compete in the Big East.
You know, Matt, I think you bring up some great points about especially the transfers that are coming in, but let's talk about that core nucleus that DePaul returns, because if anything holds true with the Big East Conference, it's that veteran players tend to thrive. And I really like the pairing of Jalen Butts and Romeo Weems. You know, in the spotlight of Paul Reed, Jalen Butts kind of was in the shadows, but I mean, averaging 10 points a game, shooting just 60% from the field. I mean, those numbers are only going to go up, especially now with Paul Reed out of the picture. He's going to fill that bigger role. He's 6'9", 225 pounds. He's going to be a solid power forward for the Blue Demons. And Romeo Weems just coming in at 6'7". Those are some pretty lanky guys there that you're going to have on the court. And again, if Paul Reed shows anything that the DePaul offense is capable of, it's going to be matchup nightmares. And I think these two guys are the epitome of that. You've got Charlie Moore at the point, distributing and scoring, which I think is probably the best combination you can get from your point guard. You know, sometimes there are guards in the Big East that just score, others that just distribute. He's kind of a little bit of both, which is great. Now, Nick Ungenda, their center, he got some minutes last season. I think he needs to take a big jump because you've got those three guys, but again, it's 5 on the court. Nick Ungenda is going to be the difference maker, I think, because you've got those guys that can score. You got a guy in the wing, a guy in the paint. You need Nick Ungenda to hold it down under the hoop. And I think that's going to make or break the season. That's my take.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And then it's just, I mean, these guys, they need to perform well. They need to perform well in big games. And it's said a lot of times about programs that have a tough time. It's about learning how to win. I mean, we see it all the time, and you've seen it in Providence with the Friars, where the team plays a whole bunch of close games, but can't quite figure it out until later in the season, and then the wins just start coming. And I mean, in a short season, you can't hang around. You need guys that are mentally tough from the get-go, and we don't know if this is a DePaul team that can figure out how to win in the Big East. History is not kind to them. on that front. But Charlie Moore is an incredibly tough player, and Jalen Butts and Romeo Weems should, if they can play to their ability, be able to give you two high-level players. If those guys can all come together and play and make those clutch plays, play with Big East toughness, then we might be looking at this 10th spot as a little bit low. They might jump up to 7th or 8th in the conference, or maybe even a little bit higher. On the flip side, you lose a guy like Paul Reed, that hurts a lot, and they could bottom out and finish bottom of the Big East yet again. I mean, last year we saw Georgetown fall apart, and DePaul had that strong non-conference, and DePaul still finished 2 games worse than them in Big East play. So there's still quite a lot to figure out with this Blue Demon program, and it starts at the top with Dave Lato.
Yeah, Matt, you're right. And I think if the Big East tournament from 2020 bodes any momentum for them, they did win Wednesday night against Xavier. And I was at the game, and there were a good handful of DePaul fans there that were, extremely grateful to see DePaul advance in the Big East tournament, which hasn't been seen in, God, I can't even remember. But they beat Xavier and advanced. Well, of course, the game was not played because of COVID, but hopefully that's some momentum. And you've got guys that were playing in that game that kind of feel like they're missing out. So hopefully this season, they come with a chip on their shoulder. They want to make up for what could have been a potential, and I say potential very, very strongly, Big East tournament run, maybe. I don't know. But like you said, it starts at the top with Dave Lato. He needs to piece together a team that can rack up what will be a small handful of non-conference wins, and then you got to win in the Big East.
Yeah, that's your big thing, and they've shown flashes of it. They beat Butler last season. They were able to eke out a home win against Marquette last season, and then you go that last game of Big East regular season play, you lose 93-55 at Providence. Non-conference play, you have a chance to go undefeated in non-conference play. You lose a game at home to Buffalo. Those are the types of games that really set you back, both in the eyes of voters and the media and from a team confidence perspective.
Yeah, Buffalo's a gritty team. I mean, that was losing at home. I'm not a fan of losing at home. I mean, Providence bias. The Dunk is not a fun place to lose. But for any team in the Big East, you don't really want to lose at home. Conference play, non-conference play. The Buffalo Bills are a tough team. That game could have gone either way. But again, you're completely right. With the non-conference schedule that DePaul boasted last season and their record going into conference play, you expected a team to finish around 5 or 6, finish the complete opposite, dead last in the basement of the Big East. I think personally that this season they're a little underrated. I don't think they deserve to come in at 10th. On my personal rankings, I have them around the 7-8 mark, maybe. I had them at 7, maybe 8, depending on a few other things. But I think they have the potential to finish higher. Dave Lato's got to piece everything together, and they have to play with heart and toughness. I mean, some games, like the Providence blowout game at the last regular season game, they just did not come out to play, and you could see it. It doesn't help it was Providence's senior night, but you could see that DePaul did not come out to play. So I think there's a mentality to it too. If you're in the bottom of the Big East and you go on the court night after night and you lose, I think it starts to eat at you mentally. So I think there's a mentality that they need to bring into the season that we have the talent to win games. And Dave Lato, it starts with him. He's got to instill this confidence in them.
Absolutely.
But anyway, that's all for DePaul. For Matt St. Jean, this is Joe Howie. We look forward to see you next time on The Flex.